Okay, good afternoon everybody, and welcome to this panel discussion. The Isle of Man is home to a rich e-gaming ecosystem. And with all of that experience on the island, how do we support developing and emerging e-gaming markets? Joining me on the panel this afternoon to discuss that point, we have Lee Hills, Founder and Director of Solutions Hub, Luke Adebayo, Business Development Manager at Capital International Group, Coco Dlamani, Team Leader at Affinity Group, and Carly Stratton, Director at Man Benham. So my first question for the panel, and Coco, I'm going to come to you first on this one. Where are the new emerging markets that the Isle of Man should be looking at?
Hello? Alright, we're good. In terms of emerging markets, so what we have found in recent months, especially as we have just come through, we've just gone through COVID, what we found is there has been a growth in traffic coming from the likes of Latin America, Africa, and quite a range of Asian countries as well. That being said, it's changing all the time, but those specific markets we're finding seem to be very lucrative. Quite a number of operators are moving towards focusing on those jurisdictions. So Latin, Africa, and of course Asia.
Okay. Lee, is it just different jurisdictions that we should be looking at, or are there other emerging markets?
It is me. Oh, perfect. Thank you. That was a good start. Certainly same experience in terms of geographical regions, but we should also be building upon technologies and betting lines. So obviously the Isle of Man's had a huge amount of experience in blockchain, in all kind of forms of it, in terms of decentralized betting, operators that are using traditional technologies but just want to accept crypto and have found a way of dealing with the kind of treasury risks around it, and AML compliance risks, etc. And also esports, because we've got a huge amount of credibility in the esports betting sector. Pretty much anybody who's anybody is either on the Isle of Man or, apart from one who successfully did a trade sale based off the Isle of Man and the reputation that we afford with that. So.
Okay, and Luke, what are you seeing from the bank's point of view?
It's probably a couple of things actually. I'd say operators that are targeting Latin America probably increased substantially this year for us. Secondly, I would say probably Curacao licensees as well. So we're just looking at figures from last year to this year. We've probably gone up about 60-70% in our bank accounts that have come to us. So that's been quite huge from that perspective. And probably the third one where my kind of banking hat comes on is actually clients, operators, licensees coming to us as a secondary bank or even a third bank. What we try and see is a lot of trends where clients are going to your EMIs or your payment service providers, but actually opening 3, 4, 5 bank accounts with different entities, because there's still that risk that one day the doors are going to be closed on them and they have to that can completely stop their operation overnight. So that's something we're seeing more and more as we go forward.
Okay, yeah, that kind of tallies in with everything that we're seeing, and you heard Lyle talk earlier about Latin America in particular being a real focus for the Isle of Man moving forward, and we looked at other emerging markets there. Thinking about that, what are some of the key challenges in supporting those emerging markets? Luke, I'll start with you.
So I think for us, from a bank perspective, it's actually understanding the industry. And I think there's a lot of service providers out there that probably don't spend the time doing that. We were actually chatting the other day about actually collating documents for onboarding, for example, and we might ask for an AML or a CFT policy. But actually what we try and do is not just see it as a tick box exercise, it's actually examining that AML CFT policy, is there things around kind of SARS or staff training or things like that, which we've kind of helped with. And actually there's some clients directly that have come outside of CSPs, for example, we've kind of said, actually this is not actually up to scratch so much. On the flip reverse of that, a lot of the business that we're getting from Curacao actually are probably at that kind of gold standard to the Isle of Man, that I would say. And it's been quite interesting to watch some of our existing clients go from a Curacao license and then locate an Isle of Man CSP and then get an Isle of Man license. So it's kind of been good to see them go through that cycle and actually see the Isle of Man as a good jurisdiction for banking, but then also go into a CSP and other providers. And then what we can see transactionally through the bank accounts is actually all the same kind of players and operators are just paying each other. So that kind of system kind of grows and grows and grows, which has been good for us in that respect, because we've got clients that are opening an account in, say, 5 working days, and then they've got a load of partners that then come to us as well. So it kind of puts us in a good stint rather than potentially waiting 3, 4, 5 months that they are now.
Are you seeing clients maybe take a license in other jurisdictions first of all, and then come into the Isle of Man after that?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, probably Curaçao's the big one. We're seeing a really rapid decrease in kind of Maltese licenses first, or actually clients are just coming directly to the Isle of Man. It's quite funny actually, because you speak to some clients and they say, I'm going for the Isle of Man license, and you might know, I don't know, Affinity or Bad Benin, but they kind of forget how small the Isle of Man is, and you know, drop names and yeah, I already know them kind of thing. So yeah, that would be my answer to that.
All right, Carly, from a legal perspective, what are some of the challenges in servicing those emerging markets that we just touched on?
I think from a legal perspective, they need to ensure that they get the legal opinions in place to confirm that they can enter into that market. Equally, if they're looking to target for marketing purposes, they need to ensure that their opinions also cover the marketing perspective. Just internally within the organisation itself, assuming it's obviously licensed on the Isle of Man, they need to consider their business risk assessments, business risk appetite. Also, usually it's not uncommon that there'll be technology that's used in certain jurisdictions, so they need to make sure technological risk assessments are done, etc. They collect their KYC on counterparties. So there's quite a lot of work around an operator considering a new jurisdiction or a new product equally when they're going into that. And I think also one thing to bear in mind is just check your license conditions and ensure if there's anything in the license conditions that requires prior approval or notification events to the GSC, or perhaps needs an updated business plan provided so that they're kept up to date with your plans and things of that nature. So it's almost looking at your business standing back and going, right, we're going to move forward, what do we need to do? From a practical point, we've also found that perhaps certain KYC providers, they don't have that geographical reach to the new area, so equally you need to consider if the providers you have in place meet the requirements you need.
Okay, and Coco, from a CSP point of view, what are some of the challenges that you're seeing in terms of servicing those new markets?
So in terms of servicing those new markets, one of the challenges we are finding is, of course, we are a tier one jurisdiction, so there are certain requirements, especially from an AML CFT perspective. Quite often you find that in these markets they've never been asked to provide certain CDD. They might have been playing on certain websites which were not regulated, and for that reason it's just getting these players to understand that there are certain measures that we need to abide by. There's certain procedures that we have in place. So that also goes back to the likes of even the providers that we use. Sometimes with operators, especially now that we're moving more into cryptocurrency, we need to make sure that the providers that you're using, especially if they're, for instance, the ones who are going to accept the crypto and translate it to fiat, we need to make sure that the providers that we use can access those markets and can allow us to facilitate the businesses that we have, so the companies that we look after. So of key importance really is that these markets, and when we are moving into these markets, that they understand that we are operating in the Isle of Man, and it's just basically educating the players, and that's the challenges we are finding. It's just educating them and them understanding why we ask for the things we ask for and why we need them in a specific way, especially in likes of, like I said, cryptocurrency. We need to make sure we have a closed loop policy, and we need as businesses to work more extensively in making our players understand that, so that we can meet our regulatory requirements as well.
Okay, so we touched there briefly on kind of AML. What are some of the challenges with things like AML, with CFT, with source of funds, with CDD? What are some of the specific challenges there, Carly?
So a lot of the processes, or some of the gaming companies now, it's automated. So they'll do an awful lot of automation initially, perhaps on a lower level, or lower risk level. But it's making sure, as I said, that technology has the reach to do the required checks in that jurisdiction, and you have that jurisdictional reach. Equally, just again, if you look at it from the operator's perspective, moving into that market, they may consider that a particular market poses a higher risk for their business because that jurisdiction may be on a higher risk rating just on the global requirements, or equally players may pose a greater risk because they're from a particular jurisdiction. So it's the business sitting back looking at that and seeing, as I say, their risk appetite, reflecting that within their business risk assessment. Equally, they might consider for a customer, they might think, well actually because it's a higher risk area, we might want to put different thresholds in for customers in that jurisdiction for checking purposes. So it's really, as I say, it's planning it out before you enter that market and making sure you understand the risks associated with the market, documenting it, ensuring the procedures are up to date and that they are followed.
Okay. Luke, from your point of view, what do you see the specific challenges in those areas specifically?
From a bank perspective, it's kind of client-on-client basis really, but I'd say from a source of funds perspective, it's just really understanding that kind of transactional flow kind of in and out. I think what's kind of good with us since we launched the bank probably about 18 months ago, we're kind of seeing the same kind of payment service providers coming through that are coming into the bank accounts. The payments out are starting to become a bit more static, so it's kind of unusual now, I would say, for us to see a potential new player coming in into our bank accounts really. And it's kind of seeing those agreements kind of up front really kind of helps us. I'd say probably more on the source of wealth front, that's where we sometimes get into a bit of a pickle, just trying to understand, you know, these beneficial owners that have come into kind of the gaming industry, what are their backgrounds, how have they kind of accumulated that wealth to start that business, and it's really just kind of painting a trajectory so we can kind of understand that. But I think what's kind of good from an Isle of Man perspective, we can run down the road. I know Carly and Coco will know that I'll just run down to their office and ask a couple of questions, but we kind of can get around it, and it's having those good relationships. You know, as a bank, if we're dealing with a licensed CSP on Ireland, they have to go to certain certain heights and getting that gaming license. You know, so we know we can bank that client. It's just perhaps just having a better relationship and just being more open in our conversation, I think.
Okay, Coco, when we were preparing for this session, we talked about KYC in some of those markets. Give us your thoughts on that.
So in terms of KYC in these markets, what you find is a lot of these markets aren't used to being asked to provide certain information. For example, if you hit certain thresholds, you're required to provide enhanced due diligence. So we want to know, where have you obtained your funds? Can you proceed in gameplay? Especially if, let's say, there's responsible gambling measures to take into account. So what we found is in terms of difficulties is obtaining that CDD, and when it comes to the likes of crypto, sometimes when a player can deposit through one means, they do not necessarily withdraw through the same means. So this goes against our traditional procedure, which is basically a closed loop. So where you're supposed to withdraw is where you deposit is where you withdraw. Now with crypto, it's completely different, and it can be very challenging. So we would then adopt other means in terms of trying to confirm that the funds are going to end up in the hands of the same player who actually deposited the funds. So we would ask more questions, and what we found is there is challenges in obtaining that due diligence and those documents. But then players are becoming more and more aware, and with our operators, especially the ones we deal with at Affinity, we're consistently trying to educate the players and in order to obtain what we need.
Okay, Lee, just following on there, Coco's mentioned crypto in particular. What are some of the kind of bespoke compliance requirements in some of these emerging markets, both in terms of location and types of markets?
to a certain extent, the message that I would say is we've been there and done it now. You know, the first decentralised gambling licence was issued in May 2017. We've had, you know, a few years working at this now. The regulator is, you know, extremely in favour of cryptocurrencies. They kind of know not just what Bitcoin or Ethereum is now, they know what, you know, they've worked with operators who have issued their own tokens, gone through an ICO process, done it cleanly. In one instance has gone on to be a listed entity, in other instances gone on to do, you know, significant trade sales from the Isle of Man. So the beautiful thing that the Isle of Man has is that it used to be quite restricted, which was lovely for me. But now there's a lot of there's a lot of people and a lot of different providers who can help people internationally when they're saying, okay, we want to set up a crypto arm, we want to do it in this jurisdiction. There's not many places you can go with the wealth of experience that the Isle of Man has on how to do it in a compliant way that doesn't block you in the future, that doesn't get you, you know, your collar felt at an airport somewhere, but also just, you know, doesn't block you from listings, trade sales, access to banking, other things. When you are introducing things like crypto, it's that what we used to think about when we were talking about crypto. I mean, crypto is basically just entirely entrenched in the gambling market now. Whether you accept it via a PSP and they're regulated and they sit over there, or whether you take it yourself, it's significantly different than what you have to look at. But these kind of, the processes that sit around that and your considerations in terms of appropriate risk ratings and what addition you might need to do, this is kind of, it's all been done, you know, it's all been done by multiple people, the information's been shared, and now the Isle of Man's a really good place to kind of put that. The biggest issue that you have now, well, there's a couple of issues. One, which was told to me by an accountant friend the other day, apparently Zero and other traditional platforms don't allow you to account for cryptocurrency. In fact, Zero apparently introduced it, but they did it to 2 decimal places. That was causing a bit of an issue. And they've subsequently taken it off, of course. And the other one is, of course, the bank's appetite to lend to you, because you don't live in isolation. You know, even if you're a full crypto operator, you still need to pay staff, salaries, taxes, whatever. You know, you still need to pay for your license. So, you know, you need to interact with banking institutions. And actually, you know, there's still a condition that you do have a bank, even if you're a full crypto and you just want it to be owned crypto only. So you have to have something along those lines, and it's difficult, obviously, to get banks to come to that table. But I'm sure that after this session, much more.
I think actually you learned that one. A question from the audience that's come in on Slido that links in quite nicely with the conversation we've just been having around AML and CDD, for example. And the question is this: have the panel members considered utilising third parties who can produce due diligence reports on those clients which may be reluctant to provide enhanced information or are of a higher risk? Anybody got thoughts on that?
I'll take this one. So we work with a range of other suppliers which do provide these reports. So we are always open when it comes to understanding who our players are. So that's one of our key aspects when we first engage with a player. We want to know who they are so that we can risk rate them. So if ever there are additional suppliers, there's quite a range which actually provide this. So when a player is first navigating on a website, what would traditionally happen is that we would confirm that whether this is a real player and confirm that they are based in the jurisdiction that they say they are based in, following which we would then move forward into risk rating them. So if this is an additional way, if it's a company that wants to provide these services, we're always open to engage with additional suppliers.
Any other thoughts on that one?
Just that people already do that. If I understood the question correctly, people are already doing that. And to a certain extent, everybody does it. You know, whether you could class that as something where you integrate WorldCheck. You know, it's a third-party supplier that's doing a piece of your compliance for you. You have to rely on their information. So, of course, you know, as a business, if you're going to outsource a lot of that, especially once, you know, I assume that the level we're talking about is more towards the upper end of the player value. So if you are doing that, you know, it's are you taking a risk as a business? Is this an appropriate partner or not? And what information are they doing? How are they checking it? Just like anything, you know, you can't absolve yourself of responsibility by saying, oh, they did it. You know, it's your responsibility as a business, as directors, etc. And you know, you've got to do your due diligence on how they're doing what they do and what they, you know, what information you're getting.
That was the point I was going to pick up on, actually. So these cover that quite well, exactly. You can't just say, well, they did it, and that's the report. You've got to consider the report, and they may raise points that either need discounted or they're actually need verified. So there's still that responsibility on the licence holder to go, yes, I have that information, but I now need to consider that information in light of my procedures and my risk appetite. So it doesn't just absolve the licence holder.
Okay. How do we maintain, as an island, how do we maintain the regulatory reputation for excellence here in the Isle of Man? Lee, do you want to kick us off on that one?
Steady as she goes. Don't oversell ourselves. Continue to be fairly, you know, not reserved, but certainly, you know, we don't. There are certain other island jurisdictions that have publicised them extremely well in certain sectors that they haven't gone so well. You know, we've kind of always been a bit more reserved, steady as she goes. The regulator is always has an open door policy, both the regulators do. But the GSC, you know, have a very open door policy. If you've got new technology, you know, when we took the first decentralised betting operator, or when they've done something a bit different, like they've got their funds through an ICO, I mean, they're two extreme examples, but, you know, when they've done that, that doesn't automatically say, well, you know, you can't get a licence because you don't fit into our kind of, our specific kind of framework for what you think you should look like. So having an open regulator who can try and help navigate that with you is super important. Also, you know, more credit to the regulator. Over the years, they have introduced, you know, new policy to deal with things as they turn up in the market, new risks, new issues that come out, and that's good, and you expect that over time. And when you start to look at, okay, well, what else have they done that's super material, like introduction of new licenses? That's been done not imposed on the industry. The industry has actually asked for those licenses and said, you know, we need something slightly different that doesn't quite fit the mold because our business model is this, or we need to solve this issue. And the regulators worked with them, and, you know, that's how, you know, sub-licensing and network licenses, etc., all these things come about. So, you know, in that respect, you know, we want our regulators to kind of continue the same, core one, I think, which is just to be very open with us, open with dialogue, you know, open to new ideas, etc. Continue to do their own work, which is to impose certain new policies and procedures on us to make sure that we're adhering to the highest possible standards we can, while you know, being practical and and just, you know, continuing to kind of sell ourselves as a good, stable jurisdiction. Because if you think about it, a lot of the benefits that we're seeing now are out of the fact that we have maintained a level of consistency, and we keep on doing what we do, and we do it well, and we do it, you know, really kind of practically. And other jurisdictions have oversold themselves, under-delivered, are going through periods of significant change at a regulatory level, or taxation, etc. And we're starting to enjoy the benefits of being steady as she goes.
Yeah, I mean, the GSC as a regulator is pretty good at this, I think, aren't they, Carly?
No, they're very good. Very consistent. And I think the benefit as well is that they do issue the guidance notes, and the licensing regime, if anyone wants to come here, is very transparent. It is set out clearly what they're expecting. They do engage with the applicants, and that's the key, really. No, they're a good regulator, and they need to be a strong regulator to really, as Lee was saying there, to ensure that level that we expect. Okay,
going to questions from the audience again. This one's for the panel as a whole, so feel free to jump in, anyone, with this. Danny asks, what is the solution for player protection when online casinos are using crypto settlement? Banks are offering player protection accounts for fiat, but what is the workaround for crypto?
If you got your checkbook. There are multiple solutions. I'll just go through a super basic one, not particularly, maybe not one that many would follow, but when we originally looked at it, when somebody said that we want to do a decentralized gambling operation, and we're going to use crypto, it's going to be crypto only and everything else, we just went back to the basics of, well, what are the measures that you can do? One of them happens to be a trust. It's been there for many, many years. You have the trust owns the assets, and the beneficiaries are the players. Company falls over, subject to proceedings, whatever. The company doesn't own those. They have to go back to the players, and that's built into the trust. That was the very first one that we did. Obviously, it's progressed a lot since then.
Because one point we've chatted through before, Luke, is... Sorry, not Luke. What we did there. Is the point where it's almost that future event, isn't it? So if I stake today with my 1 Bitcoin, and then there's that future event, and things can shift. And we've chatted through that before, but you've come across that as well, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And, again, we were talking about it, and everybody's kind of in the same boat now. This problem has existed since people started talking about it, and now everybody's kind of got an array of clients who are engaged in crypto in some way, shape or form. The same solutions are starting to come to the fore, and they're not always the absolute optimal solution that an operator wants, which is you pay me anything, I'll give you anything back, and a lot of players want that as well. But they're solutions that are workable. They do get you. They don't cut off the deposit lines. They don't cut off the withdrawal lines. They de-risk your business, and you keep the monies in whatever shape or form that is, whether it be crypto, whether it be fiat, whatever. But you keep it, safe and secure, because that's a huge thing that the Isle of Man's always had. If you look at other jurisdictions, I won't name names, but almost all of them, you can pick some event in the last 6 months when operators fall over and the players don't get back, 100 pennies in a pound. It doesn't happen in the Isle of Man, because we've always concentrated and focused on that player protection piece. And, however we've come up with it over time, it's worked.
And if I can just add on that, the great thing about our regulator is they're very principle-based. So when it comes to the player protection account, the mechanism that's used, there's a range of options, and the GSE is always open and willing to understand what option will work for you. So for example, sometimes you may prefer to have an escrow account. Sometimes you can have it in a cold storage wallet elsewhere, which covers future events. And the main thing, like as mentioned by Lee here, is that the players' funds are protected, and whichever means that is preferable to you as a company. Of key importance to the GSE is understanding these means, and as long as it abides by the principle that's in place.
Okay, I'm just conscious of time, and I can't get through every question that's come in through Slido, but we've literally got 1 minute left, so I've got time for one more. And this is for the panel as a whole. As we look at emerging markets in terms of jurisdictions and products, and the issues and challenges that they bring, what are the panel's thoughts regarding appointing a new head of eGaming?
Good idea.
Any other thoughts?
Good idea.
Okay. I know it's something that Digital Isle of Man is currently in the process of reviewing, so expect to hear news on that in the coming weeks. And as and when we've got more information on that, we will communicate that. For now though, I'd like to thank the members of our panel. Thank you all for your questions. We'll be around a little bit later during the eClod networking event if you want to catch up with any of the people on the panel, or there's any questions that we haven't answered. But for now, show your appreciation please for our panel.